They fined me $50,000 for planting roses, but when I found the receipt in the trash, everything changed. By the time I was done, the entire HOA board was bankrupt, and 3 of them were in handcuffs. My name is Barbara Chun, and I've been the HOA president of Metabrook community for 6 years. I wear red-framed glasses, keep my blonde hair in a practical bob, and believe that an HOA should serve its residents, not terrorize them. For most of those 6 years, our board worked smoothly. We maintained common areas, organized neighborhood events, and resolved disputes fairly. Then Karen Whitmore moved into Unit 47. It was a Tuesday morning in March of 2024 when I first met her. I was inspecting the newly renovated community garden when a black Mercedes SUV pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped a woman in her late 40s with dark hair styled in an aggressive pixie cut, designer sunglasses, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. "You're the HOA president?" she asked, not bothering with introductions. I extended my hand with a smile. "Barbara Chun. Welcome to Metabrook. You must be our new resident in 47. She ignored my hand. "Karen Whitmore. I need to discuss several violations. I've noticed violations." I blinked. "You just moved in yesterday." "Exactly. And in less than 24 hours, I've documented 17 clear violations of what I assume must be very lax HOA standards." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling. "The Johnsons in Unit 12 have their trash cans visible from the street. Unit 23 has Christmas lights still up in March. And don't even get me started on the circus happening in Unit 31. Mrs. Patterson in 31 just had surgery," I explained patiently. "Her family is staying with her to help during recovery. As for the others, we typically give friendly reminders before. Friendly reminders." Karen's laugh was sharp. "That's why this community looks like a garage sale. What you need is enforcement. Real consequences." I felt a small knot form in my stomach. I've dealt with difficult residents before, but something about Karen's intensity set off alarm bells. "Our approach has always been community first," I said carefully. "We believe in working with residents rather than against them." Karen removed her sunglasses, fixing me with cold gray eyes. "That's about to change. I'm running for the board in next month's election. This neighborhood needs someone who understands that rules mean nothing without punishment." She got back in her Mercedes and drove away, leaving me standing in the garden with a sense of impending doom. The next 4 weeks were a master class in manipulation. Karen attended every board meeting, taking notes and asking pointed questions. She went door to door, introducing herself to residents and subtly planting seeds of discontent. "Did you know the Chun family's fence is 3 inches taller than regulations allow?" She'd whisper, and Barbara approved it herself. Makes you wonder what other rules she's breaking for her friends. She created a glossy newsletter called Metabrook Truth and distributed it to every mailbox. The publication was filled with photographs of minor infractions, most of them blown out of proportion. A child's bicycle left on a lawn became uncontrolled, clutter destroying property values. A resident's vegetable garden was labeled an agricultural eyesore. Tried to counter her narrative, but Karen was good, very good. She framed every rebuttal as me being defensive. Every attempt at context was painted as making excuses. She was building something, and I couldn't quite see the endgame. The April election was a disaster. Karen ran on a platform of accountability and standards, Supromisette to restore Metabrook's reputation and protect property values from declining oversight. 3 of our board members chose not to run for re-election. Exhausted by Karen's constant attacks, she ran alongside 2 allies she'd recruited, Thomas Bradley, a retired accountant who seemed to worship her, and Linda Morrison, who was easily manipulated. Karen won by a landslide. Thomas and Linda secured the other 2 open seats. Suddenly, Karen and her allies held 3 of the 7 board positions. With 2 existing members she'd managed to sway to her side during her campaign, she effectively controlled the board. Our first meeting with the new composition was in May of 2024. I sat at the head of the table in our community center, looking at faces that ranged from hostile to uncertain. "First order of business," Karen announced. not waiting for me to call the meeting to order. We need to revise our fine structure. Currently, first violations receive warnings. That's unacceptable. I propose we implement immediate financial penalties. Karen, that's extremely aggressive, I protested. Most violations are minor and unintentional. A warning system allows residents to correct issues without financial hardship. Financial hardship? Karen's smile was razor-thin. If following basic rules creates hardship, perhaps they shouldn't live in an HOA community. I move that we implement a new fine schedule. $500 for first violations, $1,000 for second violations, and exponential increases thereafter. That's insane! I stood up, my voice rising. You're talking about fining people's rent money for leaving their garage door open overnight, or having the wrong shade of white on their mailbox. I second the motion, Thomas Bradley said quietly. All in favor? Karen asked. 5 hands went up. Only myself and one other original board member, James Park, voted against it. The new fine structure passed. Excellent, Karen said, making a note. Now, on to enforcement. I propose we hire an external compliance company to document violations and issue fines. This removes any personal bias. She looked directly at me. We all know Barbara has been far too lenient with her friends. I treat everyone equally, I said through clenched teeth. Then you won't mind professional oversight. All in favor? 5 hands again. Within 2 weeks, Karen had hired Precision Property Compliance, a company known for aggressive enforcement tactics. Teams of inspectors began prowling Metabrook daily, armed with cameras, measuring tapes, and thick rule books. The fines started immediately. Mrs. Patterson got $500 for having her son's car parked in her driveway for 3 consecutive days during her recovery. The Johnsons were hit for $750 because their grass was 3.2 inches tall instead of the required 3 inches maximum. Young couple in Unit 8. $1,000 for a wreath on their door that wasn't seasonally appropriate in June. I tried to fight every single one. I called emergency board meetings, filed formal objections, and personally visited affected residents to help them navigate the appeals process. But Karen had structured everything perfectly. The appeals went to a committee she controlled. Every appeal was denied. Residents began approaching me in the grocery store, at the gym, anywhere they could find me. Barbara, please, we can't afford these fines. They're threatening to put liens on our houses. Can't you do something? I was trying. God, I was trying. But I was 1 vote against 5. And Karen was just getting started. In July of 2024, I received a certified letter at my home. My hands shook as I opened it. Notice of violation, dear Mrs. Chun, following an inspection conducted on July 15, 2024. The following violations have been documented at your property: Unit 23, 847, Metabrook Lane, 1. Unauthorized landscaping modifications, rose garden installation without architectural approval. 2. Fence height violation exceeds maximum by 3 inches. 3. Mailbox color non-compliance cream instead of approved white. For decorative stone border not matching community standards. Total fine $50,000. You have 15 days to pay this fine or file an appeal. Sincerely, Metabrook HOA Board. I read it 3 times. Certain I was hallucinating. $50,000. 4 roses. My husband David found me sitting at the kitchen table, the letter clutched in my hand. Barbara, what's wrong? I couldn't speak. I just handed him the letter. His face went through several shades of red. As he read, "This is insane. They can't do this. That rose garden has been there for 4 years. The fence was approved by the previous architectural committee. This is targeted harassment." He was right. Of course, the rose garden had been approved in 2020. I had the paperwork somewhere. The fence had been measured and approved by our architectural committee in 2019. Even the mailbox collar had been a community decision back in 2018, before the current white-only rule. This wasn't about violations. This was Karen's endgame. She was going to destroy me financially, force me to sell my home, and eliminate the only opposition voice on the board. I filed my appeal the next day, including every piece of documentation I'd carefully maintained over the years. Approval letters, architectural committee decisions, meeting minutes, photographs with time. I'd been HOA president for 6 years. I knew how to document everything. The appeals committee chaired by Karen denied my appeal in 48 hours. Their reasoning, retroactive review, has determined that previous approvals were issued in error. Current standards apply regardless of past decisions. In other words, rules can be changed retroactively, and past approvals mean nothing. I had 2 weeks to come up with $50,000, or face a lien on my house. David and I spent those weeks in a nightmare haze. We met with lawyers who quoted fees we couldn't afford. We looked at our savings, our retirement accounts, and realized that even liquidating everything wouldn't be enough. We'd have to sell our home, the place where we'd raised our children, where we'd built our life. I attended the next board meeting with a single sheet of paper in my hand. My resignation letter. "Before we begin," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I have an announcement. Effective immediately. I'm resigning from the board. I can't serve an organization that weaponizes rules to destroy people's lives." Karen's smile was triumphant. "How unfortunate. I'm sure the stress of your financial situation is overwhelming. But rules are rules, Barbara. You, of all people, should understand that." I placed my resignation letter on the table and walked out. I didn't trust myself to say anything else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the residents Karen had fined, all the people who'd come to me for help. I thought about Mrs. Pedersen, struggling to pay a $500 fine while recovering from surgery. I thought about the young couple in Unit 8, saving for their first baby, hit with a $1,000 fine for a door wreath. Around 2 in the morning, I got out of bed and went to my home office. If I was going down, I was going to understand exactly how Karen had built her empire of fines. I started pulling board meeting minutes, financial reports, and compliance records. I'd been meticulous about record-keeping during my presidency, and I'd requested copies of everything after I resigned. As I read through months of documents, patterns began to emerge. Precision Property Compliance had been hired in early May. Their contract was odd. Instead of a flat fee or hourly rate, they received 25% of all fines collected. The more they fined residents, the more money they made. That was unethical, possibly illegal, but not the smoking gun I needed. I dug deeper. Financial reports showed money flowing from the HOA account to Precision Property Compliance, but also to several other entities: Metabrook Management Services, Whitmore Consulting, WNB Property Solutions. Whitmore, I pulled up business registration records online. Metabrook Management Services was registered to Karen Whitmore Consulting, obviously. Karen. WNB Property Solutions was registered to Karen Whitmore and Thomas Bradley. My heart started pounding. I cross-referenced the dates. All 3 companies had been registered in March of 2024, weeks before Karen was even elected to the board. She'd planned this from the beginning. I spent the next 3 days building a timeline. Every payment, every fine, every contract. The picture that emerged was breathtaking in its corruption. Karen had created multiple shell companies. The HOA would fine residents. Those fines would be paid to Precision Property Compliance, which would kick back money to Karen's other companies for consulting services and management fees. Essentially, Karen was fining residents and then paying herself with their money. But I needed proof that would hold up in court. I needed something undeniable. I was sitting in my office on the 4th day, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes crossed, when I heard David shout from downstairs, "Barbara, come quick." I ran downstairs to find him standing by our trash can at the curb. Tuesday, trash day. "Look what was in the Whitmore's trash," he said, holding up a crumpled receipt. Karen lived 3 houses down. David had been walking our dog when he noticed papers scattered on the street near her trash can. Being a good neighbor, he'd gone to pick them up. The receipt was from Office Depot, dated June 3rd, 2024. It showed a purchase of custom document paper, embossing equipment, and a professional seal maker. At the bottom, in Karen's handwriting, approval letters, various dates: 2008, 2020. I stared at that receipt, my mind racing. Then I ran back upstairs and pulled out my appeal documents, the approval letters I'd submitted, letters I'd received from the Architectural Committee in 2019 and 2020. I held one up to the light. The paper looked slightly different from other documents from that time period. The seal looked too crisp, too new. My approval letters were forgeries. Kara hadn't just retroactively changed the rules. She'd forged documents to make it look like I'd never had approval in the first place. She'd created fake denial letters to replace the real approvals in the official files. That's why my appeals had been denied so quickly. The official record showed I'd never had permission. My personal copies were now evidence of my alleged fraud. I sat back in my chair, the receipt trembling in my hand. Karen had framed me perfectly. If I accused her of forgery, she'd just point to the official files and claim I was the one who'd forged documents to cover my violations. But she'd made one mistake. She'd kept the receipt, and I was going to use it to destroy her. What would you do in Barbara's situation? Have you ever dealt with an HOA board that abused its power? Share your stories in the comments. Below, I read every single one. The receipt sat on my desk, like a loaded gun. For 3 days, Primata stared it, turned it over in my hands, photographed it from every angle, and tried to figure out my next move. Karen had made one catastrophic mistake, but I had to be strategic about how I used it. David wanted to go to the police immediately. She committed fraud. Barbara? Document forgery. This is criminal. And she claimed I forged the receipt, I replied, holding up the crumpled paper. Look at this. It's been in the trash. Any defense lawyer would argue, I planted evidence or doctored this document myself. We need more. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table. More, Barbara? We're about to lose our house. We don't have time for more. I reached across and took his hand. Trust me, Karen didn't just forge a few approval letters. This is bigger. The shell companies. The kickback scheme, she's been planning this for months. People like that always leave more breadcrumbs. We just have to find them. That night, I started making a list. Every resident who'd been fined, every payment the HOA had made to Karen's companies, every board meeting where suspicious votes had occurred. I was building a map of her entire operation. The pattern was stunning once I saw it clearly. Karen had fined 63 residents in just 4 months. The total amount collected, $217,000. Of that, Precision Property Compliance had received $54,250 as their 25% cut. But here's where it got interesting. Precision Property Compliance had then paid consulting fees to Whitmore Consulting, $41,000. Management fees to Metabrook Management Services, $38,000. Administrative fees to WNB Property Solutions, $29,000. Karen was paying herself 3 times over. The same money, laundered through multiple shell companies. She'd taken the $54,000 compliance fee and turned it into $108,000 through fake invoicing. But I needed proof beyond financial records. I needed someone on the inside. I thought about the board members. James Park had voted with me against the fine structure, but he'd been silent since then, clearly intimidated. Linda Morrison was completely under Karen's spell. Thomas Bradley was Karen's accountant and co-conspirator. Then I remembered something. At the last board meeting before I resigned, I'd noticed Margaret Sullivan, our board secretary, looking uncomfortable during Karen's financial report. Margaret had been on the board for 8 years. She was meticulous, honest, and had always taken her fiduciary duty seriously. I called her on a Thursday afternoon. Margaret, it's Barbara Chun. Do you have time for coffee? There was a long pause. Barbara, I don't think that's a good idea. Karen specifically told us not to communicate with you. Margaret, when did we start taking orders about who we can have coffee with? This isn't North Korea. It's an HOA board. Another pause. Then, quietly. Starbucks on Maple Street. 30 minutes. Margaret arrived, looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. She ordered a coffee with shaking hands and sat across from me in the corner booth I'd chosen for privacy. I can't do this anymore, she said before I could even speak. Barbara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about what's happening to you, but there's nothing I can do. I leaned forward. What if there was? What if I told you I have evidence that Karen has been committing fraud? Margaret's eyes widened. What kind of evidence? I pulled out my phone and showed her the photograph of the Office Depot receipt. I watched her face change as she read it, watched understanding dawn, watched anger replace fear. Document forgery, Margaret whispered. She forged approval letters. Not just mine. I think she's been doing it for months. Margaret, you have access to the official files, right? The Architectural Committee records? Margaret nodded slowly. I'm the records keeper. Everything goes through me before being filed. Have you noticed anything strange? Documents that don't quite match? Approvals that suddenly became denied? Margaret set down her coffee cup. Her hands had stopped shaking. The Wilson family, in Unit 19, they were fined $15,000 for adding a deck without approval, but I specifically remember filing their approval in 2022. When they appealed, Karen showed the committee a denial letter. I thought I'd made a mistake. I thought I'd filed the wrong document. You didn't make a mistake, I said firmly. Karen replaced the originals. Margaret, I need your help. I need to see those files. The files are in the HOA office. Karen changed the locks after you resigned. Only she and Thomas have keys now. I sat back, thinking, when's the next board meeting? Tuesday night, 7 p.m. And the office will be open. Margaret understood immediately. The office is always open during board meetings. We need access to documents for reference. Barbara, what are you planning? I'm planning to attend the meeting as a concerned resident. I'm allowed to do that, right? And if I happen to need to use the restroom, and if I happen to get a little lost on the way back. A small smile crossed Margaret's face. The file room is next to the bathroom. Easy mistake to make. And if someone needed to help you find your way back to the meeting, they might have to unlock the file room door to show you it's not the bathroom. Exactly, I said. 10 minutes. That's all I need. Tuesday arrived with agonizing slowness. David and I arrived at the community center at 6:45 p.m. The board meeting was posted as open to all residents, but Karen looked shocked when we walked in. Barbara, she said, her voice tight, I didn't expect to see you here. I smiled pleasantly and took a seat in the back row, just exercising my rights as a resident. This is an open meeting, isn't it? Karen's jaw tightened, but she couldn't deny me access. The meeting began with standard business. Landscaping reports, pool maintenance schedules, the usual minutiae. I waited patiently, watching the clock. At 7:23 p.m., I stood up. Excuse me, I need to use the restroom. Karen barely glanced at me, absorbed in her financial report about HOA reserves. I walked out of the meeting room, down the hall, and past the bathroom. The file room door was closed but unlocked. Margaret had kept her promise. I slipped inside and pulled out my phone, setting it to record video. The Architectural Committee files were labeled by year. I pulled out the 2019 folder and started photographing. There, my fence approval. Except it wasn't my approval. It was a denial letter. But the paper was wrong. Too white, too crisp. I held it up to the light and saw what I was looking for. No watermark. The official HOA letterhead from 2019 had a subtle watermark. This paper was blank stock. I photographed it, then photographed the other documents in the folder for comparison. 3 other denial letters on the same suspiciously white paper. I pulled the 2020 folder. 2 more forgeries. The 2020 folder had the Wilson family's denial for their deck. Same white paper, same too crisp seal. Karen had been forging documents for at least 2 years. I was photographing the last folder when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I froze, my phone still raised. The door opened. Margaret stood in the doorway. Behind her, Karen's voice echoed from the meeting room. Where did Barbara go? It's been 15 minutes. Did you get what you needed? Margaret whispered urgently. I nodded, shoving my phone in my pocket. More than enough. Then go. The back door leads to the parking lot. I'll tell them you weren't feeling well and your husband took you home. I grabbed her hand. Thank you. You're saving this community. Just make sure she goes to jail, Margaret said fiercely. She's destroyed too many families. I slipped out the back door and found David waiting in our car. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I felt the weight of what I'd just done. I had evidence. Not real, documentable, photographic evidence of a criminal conspiracy. But I still needed one more thing. The original documents, the real approval letters that Karen had removed from the files. Without them, a skilled lawyer could argue that the originals never existed, that residents like me had simply assumed verbal approvals were official. Where would Karen keep the originals? She'd need them to copy the signatures, to match the format. She wouldn't destroy them until she was certain her forgeries were accepted. They had to be somewhere. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about Karen's house, about the trash where David had found the receipt. If she was careless enough to throw away the receipt, what else might be in her trash? What else might be in her recycling? Wednesday was recycling day on our street, which meant Tuesday night, everyone put out their recycling bins. At 11 p.m., long after the lights in Karen's house had gone dark, I walked our dog past her house. It was perfectly innocent. People walked dogs at all hours, and if I happened to notice that her recycling bin was overflowing with papers, and if I happened to see what looked like official documents on top of the pile, well, I was just being a concerned neighbor. I glanced around. The street was empty. I reached into the bin and pulled out a handful of papers. My hands started shaking. They were architectural committee approvals. Original approvals from 2019, 2020, 2021, 20 dozens of them. Some were for properties that had been fined. Some were for properties that hadn't been fined yet. Karen was planning to fine more residents. She'd already forged the denials, just waiting for the right moment to strike. I stuffed the papers under my jacket and walked quickly back to my house. Once inside, I spread them across my dining room table. There were 47 original approval letters. 47 families Karen had either already victimized or was planning to target, including mine. There was my original fence approval from 2019, signed by the architectural committee chair at the time. There was my rose garden approval from 2020, both bearing the proper watermark, the authentic seals, the real signatures. David came downstairs and stared at the table. Is that what I think it is? The smoking gun, I said. Every piece of evidence we need. The originals she stole, the forgeries she created, the receipt showing she bought the equipment, and the financial records showing the money laundering scheme. We need to call the police. Not the police, I said slowly. Karen didn't just commit fraud against residents, she committed fraud against the HOA itself. She embezzled HOA funds through fake companies. That makes this a civil matter and a criminal matter. We need the FBI. David blinked. The FBI. Wire fraud. Mail fraud. If any of those fake invoices crossed state lines, it's federal jurisdiction, and I'm betting Precision Property Compliance is registered in a different state to avoid local oversight. I pulled up my laptop and started searching. 20 minutes later, I had my answer. Precision Property Compliance was registered in Delaware. Whitmore Consulting was in Nevada. WNB Property Solutions was in Wyoming. All three states known for easy business registration and minimal oversight. Karen had been very careful, or so she thought. Thursday morning, I called the FBI field office. I was transferred 3 times before reaching Special Agent Maria Rodriguez in the White Collar Crime Division. Agent Rodriguez. My name is Barbara Chun, and I have evidence of a multi-state fraud scheme involving document forgery, wire fraud, and embezzlement of community funds. There was a pause. Ma'am, are you talking about an H? I know how it sounds, I said. But this isn't about petty neighborhood disputes. This is organized fraud. The perpetrator has stolen over $200,000 from residents through a complex shell company scheme, and she's used document forgery to legitimize illegal fines. I have photographs of the forged documents, the original documents she stole. financial records showing the money flow, and a receipt proving she purchased forgery equipment. Another pause. Longer this time. "Mrs. Chun, can you come to our office this afternoon?" 2 hours later, I sat in a gray conference room at the FBI field office, watching Agent Rodriguez's expression change as she reviewed my evidence. She'd started skeptical. Now she was leaning forward, her eyes sharp with interest. "Mrs. Chun," she said finally, "you've built one hell of a case. When can you show me these original documents?" I pulled out my folder. "Right now!" She spread the documents across the table, comparing the originals to my photographs of the forgeries. I watched her make notes, watched her highlight sections, watched her build the framework of a federal case. "This is document fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, and embezzlement," she said finally. "The fact that the shell companies are registered in multiple states gives us clear federal jurisdiction. Mrs. Chun, I need you to not contact anyone about this investigation. Don't tell your neighbors. Don't post on social media. Don't even tell your husband more than you already have." "Can you do that? For how long?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Maybe 3. We need to build an airtight case, get warrants, and coordinate with the State Attorney General's office. When we move fast, and we move hard. If Karen Whitmore gets even a hint that we're investigating, she'll destroy evidence and flee." I nodded. "What about my fine? The lien on my house?" Agent Rodriguez smiled grimly. "I'll make a call to the county recorder's office. That lien will be frozen pending investigation. And Mrs. Chan, you might want to attend the next board meeting. I have a feeling it's going to be memorable. Can you imagine the satisfaction Barbara must have felt walking out of that FBI office? The tables were about to turn in a way Karen never saw coming. Drop a comment if you've ever had to gather evidence against someone who wronged you. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I had to watch Karen parade around the neighborhood like she owned it, knowing that federal agents were building a case against her. I had to smile and nod when she stopped me at the mailbox to remind me that my payment deadline was approaching. I had to pretend everything was normal while wearing a wire for the FBI. Yes, a wire? Agent Rodriguez had asked me to try to get Karen talking about her scheme. "We have the documents," she'd explained, "but a confession would seal the case. If you can get her to admit to anything, the forgeries, the shell companies, even just her awareness of the fake invoices, that makes prosecution much easier." So on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after my FBI meeting, I knocked on Karen's door. She answered in her usual designer outfit, her expression cycling rapidly, from surprise to suspicion to smug satisfaction. "Barbara," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "come to beg for mercy." I forced my shoulders to slump, let my voice shake. "Karen, please. I can't pay the $50,000. We're going to lose our house. There has to be some way to resolve this." Karen's smile widened. "There is a way. Pay the fine." "I don't have it." "You know I don't have it, but I could pay in installments. Maybe $5,000 a month?" She pretended to consider it. "That's not how HOA fines work. Barbara, you know that. You were president. The rules are very clear. But those approval letters, I had approval for everything. The fence, the roses, all of it. I have the paperwork." Karen's eyes glittered. "Your paperwork doesn't match our official records. If there's a discrepancy, the official records take precedence. That's also in the bylaws." "How is that possible? How could the records be so different?" She shrugged, but I saw something flicker in her expression. Pride, maybe, or the desire to gloat. Records get updated all the time. Reviews happen. Sometimes what people think was approved actually wasn't. Sometimes memories are faulty, so the records just changed. "Records are corrected to reflect proper procedures," Karen said carefully. "That's all I can tell you. Now, unless you have my $50,000, I suggest you contact your realtor." She closed the door in my face. Not a full confession, but enough. The FBI had records are corrected on tape, spoken by the person who'd corrected them through forgery. Agent Rodriguez called me that afternoon. "Perfect. We move tomorrow night. There's a board meeting scheduled for 6 p.m. Correct? Correct. Be there. Bring your husband. You're going to want to see this. Wednesday arrived with crystalline clarity. I dressed carefully that morning, my red blazer, my red glasses, my most professional outfit. David asked if I was nervous. Nervous? No. Excited? Absolutely. We arrived at the community center at 5:45 p.m. The parking lot was fuller than usual. Word had spread that I'd be attending, and residents wanted to see the confrontation. Mrs. Pattison was there, still moving slowly from her surgery. The Johnsons came, the young couple from Unit 8, holding their newborn baby. The Wilson family, who'd been fined for their deck. They were all victims of Karen's scheme, though most didn't know it yet. Karen arrived at 5:55 p.m., pulling up in her Mercedes. She saw the crowd and her expression hardened. Thomas Bradley and Linda Morrison arrived moments later, looking uncertain about the audience. The meeting began promptly at 6 p.m. Karen called it to order with her usual authoritarian efficiency. First order of business. Financial report. Our reserves are at $423,000, up from $206,000 in January. This is due to improved compliance and enforcement. Improved compliance, she meant the money she'd extorted from residents. Second order of business, Karen continued. We need to discuss the Chun property situation. Barbara Chun has failed to pay her fine and has failed to correct her violations. I move that we proceed with placing a lien on the property. I raised my hand. I'd like to speak during public comment. Karen's jaw clenched. Public comments is at the end of the meeting. Actually, Margaret Sullivan said quietly, residents can request to speak on agenda items when they're discussed. It's in the bylaws. Karen shot Margaret a venomous look, but she couldn't refuse without looking tyrannical in front of the entire community. Fine. Barbara, you have 3 minutes. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I could feel every eye on me. Thank you. I want to talk about due process, about fairness, about the difference between legitimate enforcement and targeted harassment. Your 3 minutes, Karen interrupted. I was HOA president for 6 years. In that time, we collected an average of $23,000 per year in fines. Reasonable fines for genuine violations. But in the 4 months since Karen took control, this board has collected $217,000. That's not enforcement. That's extortion. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen stood up. That's a serious accusation, Barbara. Do you have proof? I smiled. Actually, I do. That's when the doors opened. Agent Rodriguez walked in, flanked by 4 other FBI agents. Behind them, 2 local police officers. The room went completely silent. Karen Whitmore, Agent Rodriguez said, her voice carrying across the stunned room. Karen had gone white. Yes? I'm Special Agent Maria Rodriguez with the FBI. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, document forgery, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Karen tried to run. She actually tried to run. She made it 3 steps before an agent caught her arm. The room erupted. Residents were on their feet, some cheering, some gasping, some just staring in shock. Thomas Bradley, Agent Rodriguez continued as another agent handcuffed Karen. You're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. Thomas went quietly, his face gray. Linda Morrison burst into tears. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know what they were doing. Agent Rodriguez nodded to her. We know, Ms. Morrison. You're not being charged, but we will need your testimony. As the agents led Karen and Thomas out in handcuffs, Karen locked eyes with me. The hatred in her gaze was pure and hot. You did this, she hissed. I smiled. No, Karen. You did this. I just made sure you got caught. After they were gone, Agent Rodriguez addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that any fines paid under false pretenses will be refunded through the restitution process. We're seizing the assets of the shell companies Ms. Whitmore created, and those funds will be returned to the community. If you believe you were wrongly fined, please contact our office. We have extensive documentation of the fraud scheme." She turned to me. "Mrs. Chun, thank you for your cooperation. Your lien has been lifted, and your fine has been voided. The documents you provided were instrumental in building this case." The room exploded into applause. Patterson was crying. The Johnsons were hugging each other. The young couple with the baby came up to thank me, tears streaming down both their faces. "You saved our home," the husband said. "We were going to have to move. We couldn't afford the fines and the baby. You saved us." I hugged them both, my own eyes wet. We saved each other. This is what a community is supposed to do, protect each other. The emergency board meeting that followed was brief, with Karen and Thomas gone, and Linda recusing herself due to her involvement. The remaining board members included myself, Margaret James, Park, and 2 others who'd been intimidated into silence during Karen's reign. James spoke first. "I move that we immediately suspend the current fine structure and return to our previous warning-based system." Seconded, Margaret said immediately. The vote was unanimous. "I also move." James continued, "that we terminate our contract with Precision Property Compliance, effective immediately." Seconded. Another unanimous vote. Margaret looked at me. "Barbara, will you consider returning as HOA president?" I shook my head. "No. I think we need fresh leadership, but I'll stay on the board and help however I can." Over the next few days, the full scope of Karen's fraud became clear. The FBI had found evidence of 47 forged documents. She'd stolen over $150,000 through her shell company scheme. The additional $67,000 represented legitimate HOA business, but she'd inflated invoices by 30 to 40% to skim additional funds. Precision Property Compliance was shut down. The FBI discovered it was essentially Karen and 2 employees who did her bidding. The company had no legitimate business beyond Metabrook and 2 other communities. Karen had infiltrated with similar schemes. Thomas Bradley had been the architect of the financial scheme, setting up the shell companies and creating the fake invoicing system. His accounting background made him invaluable to Karen's operation. In exchange, she'd paid him $25,000 in consulting fees, modest compared to her take, but enough to motivate his cooperation. The trial happened 6 months later. I testified for 3 hours, walking the jury through the timeline of Karen's scheme. I explained how she'd systematically taken over the board, implemented punitive fines, forged documents to justify those fines, and then funneled the money to herself through shell companies. The prosecution presented the Office Depot receipt, the forged documents, the original approval letters, the financial records, and the recording of Karen admitting that records are corrected, showed the jury how Karen had registered her shell companies weeks before even being elected to the board, proving premeditation. Karen's defense tried to argue that she'd been overzealous, but not criminal, that she'd genuinely believed the original approvals were invalid. The jury didn't buy it. How could she genuinely believe that when she'd purchased equipment specifically to forge replacement documents? The verdict came back after just 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Karen Whitmore was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Thomas Bradley received 5 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and the affected residents. Their assets including Karen's Mercedes, her designer wardrobe, and Thomas's investment accounts were seized to cover the restitution. But the real judgment came from the community itself. Karen had bought her house for $650,000. By the time everything was settled, she owed over $300,000 in restitution, legal fees, and penalties. The house was sold at auction for $575,000. After paying off her debts, Karen Whitmore walked away with nothing. The $50,000 fine that was supposed to bankrupt me. It bankrupted her instead. But the story doesn't end there. Because while Karen went to prison and the immediate crisis was over, the damage she'd done to Metabrook ran deeper than stolen money. She'd broken the trust that makes a community function. She'd turned neighbor against neighbor. She'd made people afraid to plant flowers or paint their mailboxes or make any improvement that might draw attention. Fixing that would take more than an FBI raid and a guilty verdict. It would take time, patience, and a commitment to rebuilding what Karen had destroyed. And that's exactly what we did. The moment those handcuffs clicked shut on Karen must have been incredible. Have you ever witnessed someone getting exactly what they deserved? Share your stories. Billow, I love reading about karma in action. The morning after Karen's sentencing, I woke up to find my doorbell ringing at 7 a.m. I pulled on my robe and shuffled to the door, expecting a package delivery. Instead, I found Mrs. Patterson standing on my porch, holding a homemade apple pie. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I got my $500 back yesterday. The FBI sent a check. That money, Barbara. That was my medication budget for 3 months. Karen almost killed me, and you saved my life." I took the pie and hugged her. "You don't need to thank me, Helen. We look out for each other. That's what neighbors do." But she wasn't the last. Over the next week, I received 23 thank you gifts. Pies, flowers, gift cards, homemade cookies, even a hand-knitted scarf. The Johnsons brought a bottle of wine. The Wilson family invited us to dinner. The young couple from Unit 8 named me their baby's godmother. David joked that we could open a bakery with all the pies, but I understood what they really represented. Gratitude, yes, but also relief. Relief that the nightmare was over. Relief that their homes were safe. Relief that they could breathe again without fear of being fined for living their lives. The first order of business for the reconstituted HOA board was damage control. We called an emergency community meeting 2 weeks after the trial to address everyone's concerns and outline our path forward. The community center was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, some even watching from the doorway. I stood at the front with Margaret, James, and our 2 other board members. We'd elected James as the new president. He was steady, honest, and universally respected. "First," James began, "I want to acknowledge the harm that was done to this community. 63 families were illegally fined. Trust was broken. People were hurt financially and emotionally. We can't undo that damage overnight, but we're committed to making things right." He outlined the restitution process. The FBI had seized $212,000 from Karen's shell companies and bank accounts. After legal fees and administrative costs, $193,000 would be returned to residents who'd been wrongly fined. The remaining funds would go back into the HOA reserves. "Second," Margaret continued, "we're implementing new oversight procedures. All financial transactions over $5,000 will require approval from 3 board members, not just 1. We're hiring an independent auditor to review our books quarterly, and we're establishing a resident oversight committee to monitor board decisions." A hand went up in the audience. It was Mr. Chun from Unit 34. No relation to me despite the shared last name. "What about the fines? Are we going back to the old system?" I stepped forward to answer. "We've already voted to suspend the current fine structure. We're returning to a warning-based system for first violations. For repeat violations, fines will be reasonable and proportionate -$20-5 to $100. Not thousands, and every fine will go through an independent review committee before being issued." "What about architectural approvals?" someone else asked. "How do we know our approval letters won't be forged or changed?" "Excellent question," James said. "We're implementing a new digital approval system. Every approval will be recorded electronically with timestamps and digital signatures. Residents will receive both a physical letter and a PDF copy via email, and all approvals will be logged in a public database that residents can access online. No more mystery about what was approved and when." The meeting lasted 3 hours. We answered every question, addressed every concern, and listened to every story. Some residents were angry, understandably so. Some were scared it might happen again. Some just wanted reassurance that life could return to normal. By the end, something had shifted in the room. The fear that had hung over Metabrook for months was lifting. People were smiling again, talking to each other, making plans. The community was healing. But healing isn't instant. Over the next several months, we discovered the full extent of the psychological damage Karen had inflicted. People were afraid to make any changes to their properties. A resident called me in tears because she wanted to plant tulips but was terrified she'd be fined. A young family postponed adding a swing set for their kids because they didn't trust the approval process. So we launched what Margaret called the Metabrook Renaissance Initiative. For 3 months, all architectural review fees were waived. We encouraged residents to submit plans for improvements they'd been afraid to make. We hosted weekend workshops on home improvement, gardening, and property enhancement. The response was overwhelming. 67 families submitted improvement plans. Gardens bloomed across the neighborhood. Swing sets appeared in backyards. People painted their front doors cheerful colors. The community started to look lived in again, loved again, instead of sterile and fearful. We also reinstated community events that Karen had quietly canceled. Monthly potluck dinners, seasonal festivals, a summer concert series in the park. These weren't just social gatherings, they were acts of rebellion against the culture of fear and isolation Karen had tried to create. 6 months after the trial, we held our first Metabrook Summer Festival since Karen's reign. We set up in the community park, with food trucks, live music, a bouncy castle for kids, and a dunk tank where residents could pay $5 to try to dunk board members. James volunteered first. He went second. The money, raised $3,200, went to a community emergency fund for residents facing financial hardship. I was sitting at the face-painting booth, helping a 6-year-old decide between a butterfly and a rainbow, when a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was in her 50s, well-dressed, with kind eyes. "Barbara Chun?" she asked. "That's me," I said, finishing the butterfly on the little girl's cheek. "My name is Susan Martinez. I'm the HOA president at Riverside Gardens, about 15 miles from here. I read about what happened in your community in the news. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk to me about warning signs." I looked at her carefully. "Warning signs," she nodded. "We have a new board member, very aggressive, very focused on enforcement. She's proposed tripling our fine structure and hiring an external compliance company. When I expressed concerns, she accused me of being soft on violations. The way you described Karen Whitmore in your testimony, it sounds exactly like what we're seeing." My stomach dropped. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the bench beside me. "Tell me everything." Susan described a situation eerily similar to what we'd experienced. A new board member pushing for punitive fines, proposals to hire compliance companies, criticism of previous leadership as too lenient, seeds of distrust being planted in the community. "Has she tried to change the approval process?" I asked. "Not yet, but she keeps talking about reviewing past decisions and ensuring compliance with current standards." "Stop her now," I said urgently. "Before she takes over the board, before she implements the fine structure, before she hires the compliance company, because once those systems are in place, she used them to consolidate power, and it becomes exponentially harder to fight back." I spent the next hour walking Susan through everything I'd learned. How to document everything. How to build coalitions with other board members. How to engage the community before they become afraid. How to recognize the financial warning signs of shell companies and money laundering. As we talked, I realized something important. What happened in Metabrook wasn't unique. Karen Whitmore wasn't a one-time aberration. There were probably dozens, maybe hundreds of HOA boards across the country being infiltrated by people like her people who saw community associations as opportunities for personal enrichment rather than community service. After Susan left, armed with my phone number and a promise to stay in touch, I sat on that bench for a long time, watching the festival around me. Kids running through sprinklers, families laughing together, neighbors who hadn't spoken in months catching up over barbecue. David found me there. An hour later. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. "I was just thinking," I said, "about Karen. About what she tried to do here. About how close she came to succeeding. But she didn't succeed," David said firmly. "You stopped her. This time. But there are other Karens out there, in other communities, probably running the same scam right now. and most communities won't have someone willing to fight back. Most people will just pay the fines and move away, or live in fear, or assume that's just how HOAs work. David was quiet for a moment. Then, "So what are you going to do about it?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Barbara, I've been married to you for 28 years. I know that look. You're not just going to let this go. You're planning something." He was right. I was planning something. An idea had been forming in my mind, growing clearer with each conversation, like the one I'd just had with Susan. I want to create a resource, premeditated slowly, a guide for HOA boards and residents. Warning signs of fraud, best practices for oversight, template policies for financial transparency, contact information for reporting suspected fraud. Everything I wish I'd known when Karen first showed up. David smiled. "That sounds like you. How can I help?" Over the next 3 months, with help from Margaret, James, and even Agent Rodriguez, I compiled everything I'd learned into a comprehensive guide. We called it the HOA Accountability Handbook, Protecting Your Community from Fraud and Abuse. It included warning signs, best practices, template policies, and legal resources. Agent Rodriguez wrote a foreword explaining federal jurisdiction over HOA fraud and encouraging residents to report suspicious activity. She included her direct office line for HOA fraud reports. We made the handbook available for free online. Within 6 months, it had been downloaded over 12,000 times. I started receiving emails from HOA presidents, board members, and residents across the country. Some were asking for advice about situations in their communities. Some were sharing their own stories of HOA fraud. Some were just saying thank you for creating a resource that helped them feel less alone. Susan Martinez from Riverside Gardens called to tell me they'd stopped their aggressive board member before she could implement her scheme. Armed with the warning signs from the handbook, Susan had investigated and found that the woman had already set up shell companies in preparation for infiltrating the board. They removed her and reported her to local authorities. She was currently under investigation for attempted fraud. 1 year after Karen's sentencing, Metabrook held an anniversary celebration. It wasn't celebrating what Karen had done, it was celebrating our survival and recovery. We called it Community Appreciation Day. The festival was even bigger than the summer event. We had food, music, games, and a special ceremony where we unveiled a new community garden, the same garden where I'd first met Karen, now expanded and renamed the Metabrook Community Resilience Garden. James gave a speech about community, trust, and the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. Margaret presented awards to residents who'd shown exceptional community spirit during the crisis. When she called my name, I was surprised I hadn't known about the award. I walked to the front to applause. Margaret handed me a plaque that read, "Barbara Chun, for extraordinary courage in protecting our community, your determination saved our homes and restored our trust." I tried to say something gracious and brief, but emotions overwhelmed me. I looked out at all those faceless people I'd lived near 4 years, people who'd become true neighbors through crisis. Mrs. Patterson, healthy and smiling. The Johnsons, with their perfect lawn they no longer feared getting fined for. The young couple from Unit 8, their baby now taking first wobbly steps on the grass. A year ago, I finally managed to say we were living in fear. Fear of Venus, fear of losing our homes, fear of each other. Karen Whitmore tried to destroy this community for profit. She almost succeeded, but she failed because we didn't face her alone. We faced her together. I raised my hand, and the crowd quieted. I want everyone here to look around. Look at your neighbors. These are the people who stood with you, who supported you, who believed that our community could be better than the fear and greed that Karen represented. This plaque doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to every single person who refused to accept that corruption and abuse were just how things work. The applause was deafening. People were crying, hugging each other, laughing. It was messy and emotional and perfect. Later that evening, after the festival ended and we'd cleaned up, David and I walked through the neighborhood. It was a beautiful summer evening, warm and clear. People were out on their porches, kids playing in yards. the sound of laughter and conversation drifting through the air. "You did this," David said, squeezing my hand. "We did this," I corrected. "All of us together." As we walked past Unit 47 Karen's old house, I paused. A new family had moved in 3 months ago. A young couple with twins. Their yard was full of toys, flowers blooming in beds along the walkway, a cheerful yellow door instead of Karen's intimidating black one. The wife, Rachel, was sitting on the porch with a glass of wine. She waved when she saw us. "Barbara, want to join me?" I just put the twins down. We walked up and accepted her offer. As we sat on that porch, the same porch where Carrot had once looked down on the neighborhood, with contempt, Chal told us about her plans for a vegetable garden. She'd already submitted her architectural approval request and received confirmation within 48 hours. "I heard about what happened here," Rachel said. "The previous owner, the fraud case. When we were looking at houses, our realtor warned us. But you know what? The way everyone talked about how the community came together, how you all fixed things. That's what made us want to live here. We wanted to be part of a neighborhood that actually cares about each other." That night, lying in bed, I thought about Karen. She was currently in year 2 of her 8-year sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania. I wondered if she understood what she'd lost. Not just her freedom or her money, but the opportunity to be part of something real. Karen had looked at Metabrook and seen dollar signs. She'd seen vulnerable people to exploit and systems to manipulate. She'd seen an opportunity for personal gain. But I looked at Metabrook and saw neighbors. I saw community. I saw people who deserved to feel safe in their homes. And when I had to choose between protecting that community and protecting my own peace, the choice was obvious. The $50,000 fine that was supposed to destroy me, it ended up being the catalyst that saved our community. Because in trying to eliminate the one person who questioned her, Karen made the fatal mistake of underestimating what ordinary people can accomplish when they refuse to accept injustice. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter. It was from Karen, forwarded through her lawyer. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was brief, expressing remorse and acknowledging she had done this before at other age. She mentioned we weren't her first victims, just the first community that fought back successfully. I shared the letter with Agent Rodriguez during one of our periodic check-ins. She'd become a friend over the past 2 years, occasionally stopping by Metabrook to see how we were doing. "Interesting," she said, reading it. She mentioned previous HOAs. Did we know about those? Not at the time of trial. Should we investigate? Agent Rodriguez smiled. "Already on it? After your case, we started looking into HOA fraud more systematically. We've identified 17 other cases similar to yours across 6 states. Some are still under investigation. Your handbook has actually been instrumental in helping other residents recognize and report fraud." 17 cases. I was stunned that we know of. The actual number is probably much higher. But Barbara, your case changed something. It showed people that HOA fraud can be prosecuted successfully at the federal level. It gave victims the courage to come forward. You didn't just save you started a movement. 3 years after Karen's arrest, Metabrook was thriving. Our property values had recovered and actually increased. The neighborhood had a reputation now not as the place where fraud happened, but as the community that stood together against corruption. We'd implemented all our reforms: digital approval systems, quarterly audits, resident oversight committee, reasonable fine structure with independent review, and most importantly, a culture of transparency where residents felt empowered to question decisions and hold the board accountable. I was still on the board, though I'd resisted multiple attempts to elect me president again. I preferred my current role. The person who remembered what could happen when good people stayed silent. The person who asked uncomfortable questions. The person who made sure we never forgot the lessons Karen had taught us. On the 3-year anniversary of Karen's arrest, I visited the Resilience Garden. It had become my favorite spot in the neighborhood, a reminder of where the nightmare began and how far we'd come. Margaret found me there, sitting on a bench among the roses. My roses, as everyone called them now, though they'd been planted by a dozen different families. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, sitting beside me. "I was just thinking about that morning 3 years ago," I said, when Karen first showed up. "If I'd known everything that was going to happen, the stress, the fear, the FBI investigation, the trial, I wonder if I'd have done anything differently." "Would you?" Margaret asked. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then I shook my head. No. Because if I hadn't fought back, Karen would still be here. She'd still be destroying families. Andy. Metabrook would be a place where people lived in fear instead of a place where people build gardens together. Margaret smiled. "You know what the best revenge is. It's this." She gestured at the garden, at the community center beyond where kids were playing, at the neighborhood full of life and laughter. Karen tried to build an empire of fear and greed. You built something better. You built a real community. As I walked home that evening, I thought about the title the news had given our story, "The $50,000 Fine That Bankrupted the Board." It was catchy, dramatic, good for headlines. But it wasn't quite accurate. The fine didn't bankrupt the board. Greed bankrupted the board. Corruption bankrupted the board. The arrogant belief that ordinary people wouldn't fight back bankrupted the board. The fine was just the catalyst, the match that lit a fire Karen couldn't control. And sometimes, when systems are corrupt and people are being hurt, you need a fire to burn away the rot so something better can grow in its place. Tonight, as I finish writing this story, Metabrook is quiet. Lights glow in windows. Children's toys dot lawns. Flowers bloom in gardens. It looks like any other suburban neighborhood, but it's not. It's a neighborhood that faced darkness and chose to fight. It's a community that was almost destroyed by greed, but rebuilt itself. On trust, it's a reminder that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to accept injustice. Karen Whitmore will be released from prison in 5 years. I don't know what she'll do then, where she'll go, or if she'll truly understand the harm she'll cause. But I know this: she will never set foot in Metabrook again. The community she tried to destroy is stronger than ever. And if another Karen ever tries to infiltrate another neighborhood, there are now thousands of people who know the warning signs and have the tools to fight back. That $50,000 fine was supposed to be my ending. It was supposed to force me out, silence my opposition, and let Karen consolidate complete control. Instead, it became her ending, and our community's new beginning. What an incredible journey from facing a $50,000 fine to watching the person who tried to destroy her community get exactly what she deserved. Barbara's courage did not just save her own home, it protected countless other communities from similar schemes. If you have ever had to stand up against corruption, no matter how small, or if you have been part of rebuilding trust in a broken system, share your story below. Your experience might inspire someone else who is facing their own battle right now. Remember, one person speaking up can change everything.